Hi class, we're going to be working on Kant for the next few videos. And we're going to probably break this up into 3 videos. The first will be deontology in general, and then a little bit of required terminology for Kant. And then we will do break up the Kant in the ways we kind of did for the utilitarians, with why should we be Kantians and how to be Kantians. So let's start with some big picture. We're going to introduce first a new entire family of systems of ethics called deontology. When I say deontology, it's not one theory, it's a whole family of theories, in some ways like saying consequentialism. So what do all deontological theories have in common? Deontology believes that something intrinsic to the act itself has value. So let me say that again. What all deontology has in common is that something intrinsic to the action itself has value. So first of all, how is that different than consequentialism? Because of a difference between what you might call intrinsic and extrinsic. Consequentialism puts value in something outside of the action, specifically the consequences of the action. Whereas deontology puts value in the act itself, such as intrinsic value in the rule being followed, in intent, in intuition, uh, in feelings, something that is actually going on in the act itself. So that's what all deontological theories have in common. The most famous deontological theory will be that of Immanuel Kant, but it's not the only deontological theory. So let's just say a few more words. The next distinction in deontology is a distinction between act and rule. Now, in some senses, we've had this distinction already. The difference is, again, intrinsicness. So, an act deontologist says that the act itself has value. A rule deontologist says the part of the action that has value is the rule that is being followed. So, for instance, an act deontologist might say, well, the value is your conscience or your intuition or something like that, whereas the rule deontologist will say, nope, it is the rule being followed that has intrinsic value. So let's put right now 3 descriptors onto Kant. Kant is a rationalist rule deontologist. So take them backwards. Deontologist means something about the act itself has value. What is it about the act that has value? The rule. He's a rule deontologist. So the rules themselves are what have moral value according to Kant. But remember, he's rationalist. We've talked about moral rationalism before. They're the ones that say that ethics is a priori. So that means that for Kant, those rules are products of pure reason. They are a priori rules of action. So that's going to be big picture Kant. That's going to help us get into the ballpark. That what is valuable about an action is the rule being followed, and those rules are given to us by pure a priori reasoning. The other thing that you want to bear in mind as we move into the Kant, and I'm hoping you're going to be watching this before you read the Kant. Kant has a very specialized terminology. He uses some words in specific ways that aren't necessarily how they're normally used. And so I'm going to give you 4 particularly Kantian pieces of terminology. Make sure you're using those in the Kantian way as you are reading the Kant. So, first of all, when a word I just used a couple of times, Kant uses the word pure. When he says pure, he means lacking any empirical content. So all of the Humean relations of ideas, that's what he means by pure. And then building onto this, he's going to make a distinction between a rule and a law. And that's unfortunate, but we'll see why in a second. So both are universal, but a mere rule doesn't carry necessity, whereas a law does for Kant. It carries necessity. So what might an example be of a rule in the Kantian sense? Something that's universally true, but is not necessarily true. That is, could have been otherwise. So, for instance, here's a rule. All humans are under 8 feet tall. That is empirically true, and yet it didn't have to be true. There's still conceivable circumstances where a human could grow over 8 feet tall. By contrast, a law, says Kant, carries necessity. So a law must be true, and it's inconceivable that it's broken. So that's not law as we usually think of it. Um, Kantian laws are a priori. They're what Hume called relations of ideas. So traffic laws are certainly not laws in the Kantian sense. But neither is the law of gravity, for instance. When I drop a pen, yes, it falls at 9.8 meters per second, but it is conceivable that otherwise could happen. For instance, I can imagine that when I drop this pen, it just hovers there, or falls a little faster, or falls a little slower. So even what we would think of as the laws of physics aren't the kind of laws Kant is talking about here. He would call those rules. Instead, when he says law, think of something like a law of mathematics. That's the kind of thing he means by law. So they're pure, they're a priori, they carry necessity. So remember the descriptors we already assigned to Kant is that he's a rationalist rule deontologist. Well, combine rationalist and rule together, and that's what he means by law. So he's a law deontologist in his own vernacular. And the last important bit of terminology that Kant uses in a particular way is practical. This actually isn't unique to Kant. We're just not used to using it this way. Something is practical if it's action guiding. So that's different than how you might use the word. So what Kant's going to be up to in the first reading is he's interested in the laws of pure practical reason. So since he thinks ethics is both a priori and action guiding, that makes it both pure and practical. Notice, if you're Hume, you've just contradicted yourself, because Hume doesn't think that anything that's a priori can be action guiding, as per previous unit. But that's what Kant's up to. And so when you read the first part of the Kant, you have to be looking for his argument for that. And it's buried. It's very subtle. You have to know what you're looking for, so look for the merchant argument / example. And hopefully you'll be able to extract from that this really important argument of why ethics must be pure and a priori. So we're going to do 2 more videos on the Kant. The next one is going to be go over the first Kant reading. In essence, it's going to be talking about why we should be Kantian deontologists. The second one will answer how to be Kantian deontologists. No need to bother with any of this stuff over the break, but feel free to post discussions in the discussion board as always.